Now that we're about halfway through summer, it's time to start making plans for our fall gardens. But keep in mind that at the beginning of August, we can still expect to have at least another 8 weeks of serious insect pressure and hot, humid weather. And what is typically the most active part of hurricane season is just beginning, so we can also expect to get some serious tropical storms in the coming weeks. As you would probably expect, the northern parts of Florida usually cool down a little sooner than the rest of the state, and South Florida takes a lot longer to cool down in the fall. So different parts of Florida have different planting windows for our fall gardens. For North Florida, the fall planting season is in full swing now, and there are a lot of crops North Florida gardeners can plant in August. For Central Florida, where I am, the fall planting window is just starting to open, and we can plant mostly warm season crops, but it's still early for planting cool season crops. In South Florida, the fall planting window has not really opened yet, and there's only a few heat-tolerant crops that can be started now for the fall. South Florida doesn't really start planting most fall crops until September. Since our planting windows are so varied in August, I'm breaking down the planting list by region this month. Here is a list of warm season crops that can be started from seed in North Florida in August. Beans, corn, cucumbers, eggplant, peppers, squash, tomatoes, tropical greens and spinaches, and watermelon. Note that watermelon should be started early in the month if possible, so try to get your watermelon seeds started before mid-August. The letters DS I noted next to some of the crops stands for direct sow, which means that it's best to plant the seeds directly in the ground or in the container they will be growing in, instead of sowing seeds in small pots or trays and then transplanting them later. Here is a list of warm season crops that can be started from seed in Central Florida in August. Beans, corn, cucumbers, eggplant, okra, peppers, pumpkin, southern peas, squash, tomatoes, tropical greens and spinaches, and watermelon. Here's a list of warm season crops that can be started from seed in South Florida in August. Corn, eggplant, okra, peppers, pumpkin, southern peas, tomatoes, tropical greens and spinaches, and watermelon. North Florida gardeners can begin planting cool season crops in August. These include beets, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage and Chinese cabbage, carrots, cauliflower, celery, collards, endive, kale, bunching onions, and turnips. Some planting guides say that Central Florida can also start sowing these cool weather seeds in small pots or seedling trays to transplant out to the garden in September. But in my opinion, it's still a little too early for cool crops in Central Florida. If you're in Central Florida and you're anxious to get started with your cool season crops, then you could try starting your seeds indoors or in a protected area in small pots or trays to transplant out next month. But just know that it's likely to still be very hot, humid, and buggy when you transplant them out in the garden in 4 to 6 weeks, and they could turn bitter and go to seed early from the heat or get attacked by insect pests. Planting early can potentially give you more harvests, and earlier harvests, of course, but you have to decide if it's worth the risk of losing the plants or having them taste bitter from the heat or having to do extra work to care for your plants when they're not being grown under optimal conditions. Most longtime Florida gardeners will tell you that they wait until the weather really starts cooling down before they do any fall planting. In South Florida, it's definitely too early to start any cool weather crops, but South Florida gardeners can continue planting tropical crops such as amaranth, calabaza, chaya, gingers and turmeric, katuk, moringa, papaya, passion fruit, pineapple, Seminole pumpkin, sweet potatoes, and yucca. Herbs that can be planted in August include basil, chives, dill, marjoram, mint, and oregano. Here's a list of the seeds that I'll be planting in August. In early August, I'll be planting basil, peppers, and tomatoes. And then later in the month, I'll plant beans, cucumbers, squash, and zucchini. Tomatoes and peppers take a long time to mature, and they're sensitive to frost, so I always start them first. If I was growing eggplant, then I would start it at the same time, but I don't usually grow eggplant. I plant the tomato and pepper seeds in small pots and transplant them out to the garden 4 to 6 weeks later in September. I direct sow my beans, squash, and zucchini in the ground in the second half of August, and I direct sow my cucumber seeds in 5-gallon buckets. I usually do additional plantings of most of these crops again in September for successive harvests. I'm always tempted to start a lot more crops from seeds in August to get an early start, but I try to hold myself back because I know there's still a lot of harsh summer weather ahead of us, and we've had such hot fall weather in recent years that there's really no hurry to start fall crops here in Central Florida. Young seedlings are very sensitive to the intense summer sun, and they can burn up and die in just a couple of hours of full sun on a summer afternoon. So I find it's best to keep my seedlings either indoors under a grow light or in a location that's partially shaded from the midday sun. I often use 30 or 40% shade cloth for seedlings that I'm starting outdoors during hot times of year. And then once the cool weather arrives, the shade cloth can be taken down. Also, seedlings need consistent watering. Seedlings in small pots or seedling trays dry out very fast in the heat, so be sure to keep them well watered. Depending on how small the pot is, they may even need to be watered more than once a day, so keep an eye on them. Keeping them in some partial shade will also help them not dry out quite as fast. On the other hand, small seedlings can get pounded to death or flooded by the torrential rainstorms we get during the summer, so either keep them in a sheltered area or be prepared to bring them under shelter whenever there's a storm. Shade cloth can also help with that to some degree. I usually start my seedlings inside under a grow light to keep them safe from the perils of summer, and then I gradually move them outside once they get bigger and stronger. But seedlings can be started outdoors as long as you protect them from the elements. Succession planting is where you plant certain crops in batches over the course of several weeks or months instead of planting the whole crop all at one time. This allows you to get staggered harvests instead of having all of your crop ready at the same time. It's also a good way to minimize potential losses due to various weather events, like if a hurricane or a heat wave wipes out the crops you planted early in the planting window, or if an early freeze takes out what you planted in the late planting window. So it's a good way to experiment with different planting times and also to not have to use up or preserve all of your harvested crop at one time. I don't do succession planting with all of my crops, but I do it with a lot of them. August weather is paradise for bugs. The insect pests will be with us until we start getting some cold weather, which is still a long way off. This is one of the main reasons that a lot of longtime Florida gardeners start their seeds late in the planting season, so they can plant when there is less bug pressure. As I've been saying in my videos for the past few months, not all bugs are bad, and we should not try to kill all of the bugs in the garden, because some of the bugs are beneficial and we want to keep them around. But sometimes a particular pest will attack a crop so severely that it can ruin the crop, and those particular pests need to be controlled. For serious bug infestations, there are some organic options that can be used. A lot of bugs can be killed just by spraying them with soapy water or knocking them into a bucket full of soapy water. and there are many insecticidal soap recipes you can find online. I usually use a mix of 1 teaspoon of castile soap and 1 teaspoon of neem oil mixed into a quart of water. There are also pre-made insecticidal soaps available commercially. The brand I've used in the past is called Safer Insecticidal Soap. My biggest pest issue is usually with caterpillars. I hand pick them whenever possible, but if I'm losing the battle, then I'll use the organic pesticides BT or spinosad. Usually spinosad is the one I use. You can find links to these products in the description below the video. Just remember that if you use any pesticides, even organic ones, use them sparingly and only target the pest that is causing the damage. Take care not to kill the bees or other beneficial bugs. I hope you all have fun starting your fall gardens. Try not to overheat out there. Happy gardening!